As a preliminary matter, this is Gordon Kinder, Warrant Committee Chair. Permit to confirm that all members and persons who participate on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Rob Andrews.
Aye.
Peter Smith.
Here.
Andrew Setti.
Mute me or unmute? Oh, mute me.
I'm not sure if that was Andy. Andy might not be here. Andy, are you here?
He's not here yet.
Not here yet. Okay. Cam Hudson.
Yeah.
Janet McCormick.
Very nice.
Melissa Herman. I think Melissa might be running a little bit late. Steve Migowski.
Here.
And Sarah Kinney.
Here.
All right, staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Chris Raleigh.
I'm here.
Don Story.
Oh, Dawn Vittori here.
Okay.
Caught me off guard.
Oh, sorry. You.
Yep, here. Thanks.
And then there's some anticipated speakers on the agenda. When I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Jim Rapetti.
Here.
He's here. Leslie Leon. Leslie here yet?
Yep, I'm here.
Maggie Sharon.
Here.
Barry Goldman.
Here.
Robin Hunter.
Here.
Carl Schrico.
Jericho, here.
Jericho, sorry, I apologize. Rob reminded me today, and anyways. Bonnie Aikens.
Here. Oh, here.
Carol Jackman.
Here.
Mark Howe.
Here.
Good evening. This open hearing of the Warrant Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020. Give me one sec here. Due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we've been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend all public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you, and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. We're now turning to the first item on the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate. I will first, I'd ask that everyone please mute your microphones when you're not speaking. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. Presenters will have 8 minutes to make their presentation. After presentations conclude, I will invite public comments or questions. I ask that all public comments or questions be limited to 2 minutes. Prior to commencing questions, I'll ask all members of the public who wish to speak to identify their names and address so that I can call on them. Where possible, we allow for presenters or staff to respond to public comments. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. Further, please remember to mute your microphone or computer when you're not speaking. And please remember to speak clearly in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. Finally, any vote taken at this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote, although we do not anticipate any such votes will occur. So I'm now going to turn to my to our initial presentation. And I'm going to share my screen. All right. So welcome to the open hearing for the Dover Warrant Committee. This open hearing presents the warrant articles for FY 2022, which goes from July 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 2022. That will be voted on at the annual town meeting on Saturday, May 1st, 2021 at 10 a.m. Throughout the fall and winter, the warrant committee met with town departments and schools to review proposed budgets and warrant articles. Financial amounts we present tonight are preliminary. The final recommended amounts will be in the blue book. Each year, the warrant committee issues a guidance letter addressed to all town departments at the beginning of the budget season. The guidance letter requests that all departments submit level service or reduced expenditure budgets. We further request that any requests above level service should provide specific auditable supporting data and a justification for each request. You can access the guidance letter on the town website. At the very least, it will be made available on the landing page for this meeting. So this year we have 26 articles. 14 are annual recurring articles and 12 are special or non-recurring articles. Of those 14 recurring articles, 10 do not have associated expenditures or financial implications, and 4 do not require expenditures. Of the 12 non-recurring articles, 2 have associated expenditures or financial implications, and 10 do not require expenditures. Here's a list of the articles that have financial implications or associated expenditures. I draw your attention to the non-recurring items, which are the ones that are usually the primary focus of this meeting. And I'd also note that 2 of the recurring articles have been or are expected to be withdrawn. Here's a list of articles without associated expenditures. Again, most of the non-recurring items will be presented on at this meeting. Slight adjustment to the agenda. Following this introduction, Jim Repetti, our town moderator, will make a comment or ask a question, and I'll leave it up to him if he wants to invite public comment in this forum. Following that, we'll move on to the operating budget, Article 4, the capital budget, Article 5. The selectmen will present on a capital stabilization fund, as well as one-time projects. And then we'll move into items that are primarily bylaw and authorization requests. Generally speaking, none of these have actual financial implications. So having said that, I'd like to reach out to Jim Repetti, our town moderator, and ask him first, Jim, did you want to have a public comment available at the end of your comment?
No, that won't be necessary, Gordon. What I would like to do is just ask people to submit their comments to me or Bob Springett.
Great. The floor is yours, Jim.
Okay, thank you very much. As many of you know, we're still in the midst of dealing with COVID, and we've been in the process of trying to plan our town meeting for this coming year so that it will be conducted in a manner that will be safe for all participants. And in this regard, Felicia Hoffman and the Board of Health have been engaged in exemplary service for our town, trying to organize the meeting so that it will be as safe as possible. Part of the safety considerations suggested that we meet during the day on Saturday outside at the football field at the regional high school. One of the issues that we are currently grappling with with respect to which I seek your input is whether we should reduce the quorum requirement for the town meeting. You may recall last year that there was a special statute that was adopted that permitted us to reduce the quorum from 175 to 1/10 of that. So we reduced it to 18. And we had approximately 60 members attend the meeting. And you'll recall that we were quite expeditious in our conduct of the meeting. first question that we're wrestling with, Bob Springen and I, and Kay Peterson and Dave Havlin, Felicia Hoffman, Chris Dwelly, and Gordon Kender, all of whom are members of our committee, is whether we should reduce the quorum requirement again this year as the statute permits us. The positive of reducing the quorum is that we would be certain to be able to take action with respect to the warrant articles, which would assure the smooth functioning of the town for the coming year. The negative is, of course, that with a reduced quorum, there's less participation at the meeting, or the potential for less participation at the meeting, which may not be representative of the entire town. If we were to reduce the quorum, the next issue is whether we should confine the consideration of warrant articles to those that the Board of Selectmen deem essential to the conduct of the town governance for the coming year, or whether we should consider all warrant articles that will be discussed tonight. So I seek your input, and Bob Springen seeks your input. Feel free to contact us. My email is repetti@bc, that's bravo-charlie.edu, and my telephone number is 1056. Feel free to call me or email me with your views, or call or email Bob Springen, and advise us what your thoughts are about, one, reducing the quorum requirement again this year, and two, if we do reduce the quorum requirement, whether we should consider the entire town warrant or only those articles that the Board of Selectmen determine are essential to the town governance. And greatly appreciate your input. We're seeking advice. Last year, it was a moving target. We had to really operate off from the seat of our pants, so we weren't able to obtain as much guidance as we would have liked. We have an opportunity now to do so, so I would greatly appreciate your thoughts, and feel free to contact me at any time. Always happy to discuss this. Thank you, Gordon. Let me turn it back to you. Gordon, you're muted.
Thanks. I saw it. With that, I will turn it over to Rob Andrews to present the operating budget overview. And Rob, I'm just making you a presenter here.
Quite a few people.
Want to remind everyone to please keep themselves on mute.
So they give you a number of how many people are in? I'm just over there.
All right. So I want to first remind everyone that Chris Dwelly gave an excellent overview of the operating budget at the last Board of Selectmen meeting, which you can see on YouTube. So if you want a little bit more detail, you can go and watch the last Board of Selectmen meeting. And I believe the slides are also on the website of his presentation. But we're just going to go a little bit of a high view of the operating budget for fiscal year 22. I just want to remind everyone that we work really hard to advise. Our guidance is, which Gordon indicated, is on the website as well, that we continue to ask for level service, that we want, that what's nice about this budget is that it funds all contractual obligations, continues to be fiscally responsible with restraint, and acts, in our opinion, as good stewards of the citizens' tax dollars. You can see here the operating budget year-over-year comparison from last year to this year. It's a very slight change, 0.07%. You can see here, and the schools will go into more further detail, but overall, the change of the operating budget is only $236,510, a 1.5% change for the town departments. The Dover schools, it's minimal. It's about it's a little more than 0%, but $3,026 change, 0.1% at the region, and the debt service you can see here is where we make up some of the difference. The major cost increases for the town to see, schools are $33,792. We have all our town wages increases, insurance increases, and the total cost increase is $301,025. See here what we've appropriated and how schools are about 59.63% of the budget. You can see the breakdown there, with the next and the largest chunk being in insurance and pensions at 12%, and the rest of the town, you can see the breakdown there. From a revenue perspective, the total new growth estimate is around $1.4 million. You can see that in tax levy increase, new growth estimate, and then the local receipts estimates. This is all estimated, but I thought it was a really interesting and good piece of data for the townsfolk. You can see here that the tax rate is pretty level. I think we do a good job at that, and that if all of the recommendations from the townhouse are utilized, the estimated for FY22 is 12.76, which is less than fiscal year 21 at 12.89, which was certified. Now that obviously is an estimate and things can change. We want folks to recognize that, but I think that just speaks to kind of how we are approaching the budget this year. I think it's really important we talk about our reserves and our free cash, and there'll be more discussion about this later with some of the other articles. Free cash is our reserve fund. I think we're trying to move away from the concept of calling it free cash because there's really nothing free about it, but it's our funds that we can use for different things, but it typically includes actual receipts in excess of revenues, estimates and unspent amounts, and departmental budget line items for the year just ended, or turnbacks, plus the unexpected free cash from the previous year. The warrant committee is currently reviewing the level of free cash as we do every year. And I just want folks to understand that at this point, the warrant committee, although we've discussed it amongst ourselves, we haven't had any kind of discussion with the other stakeholders about what we're going to do and regarding free cash, or what our advice to the town will be regarding free cash for this year. Again, I just wanted to remind folks that there are some more detailed slides available on the website. Thanks. You're good, Gordon. You're on mute.
Thanks, Rob. First, I'd like to ask everyone to try and speak loudly and clearly.
Oh, sorry, Gordon.
I think, Mark, are you, Mark Howe, can I just get you for a second? I think there's been some interference coming, and I can't mute you for some reason. You seem to have some power in Zoom that I'm not familiar with.
I see two Mark Howe,
There.
actually.
I am, oh, that's my twin. Sorry. No, I had it on mute. Let me see. I'll hang up and come back.
Oh, actually, I can mute. There's one of you I can mute now. Let me try this. Mark, can you say something? Oh, I think we did it. All right, thanks, Mark. You can stay on. All right, so next, Dr. Keogh, I believe, wanted to make a comment before we begin the school budgets.
Yes, thank you, Gordon, and thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. This is bittersweet for me. I've enjoyed my experience working with both towns, of course, and Dover. When we talk about finance, I'll never forget my first meeting with folks from Dover saying, you know, we're fine with spending as long as it has value, and that has held true all the way through. And we've tried to respect that. What you'll see tonight are two, I think, very responsible budgets. Obviously, we've been through a pretty challenging stretch over the last 12 months. It was literally around this time last year when we were told we were going to shut down. And that was with maybe a day's notice. And we had to immediately switch to remote learning. We had to pass out computers, essentially. Many people were also working remotely, and therefore they needed their home computers. We had to get our kids equipped quickly and send those out across both towns. And we basically had to adapt on the fly for a remote learning model that we had never, ever envisioned. Coming into this year, we spent the summer thinking about how we can do this without breaking the bank, and to make it the most meaningful learning experiences as possible for our kids in the midst of a pandemic. And the model that we've come up with, quite honestly, is one that many other communities wish they had. I can't tell you how many times people reach out and ask, how is it that Dover and Sherburne have been able to do this? We haven't been able to get our kids in. And at DS, we've had our little ones, our K3 kids in since October, 4 days a week, and our 4-5 since December. So, and this continues. We're going to look at phase 4 in April. But all of it has been possible largely because of the support of our two communities. And the fact of the matter is, you folks over the years, long before my arrival here, well, maybe not before my arrival here back in 1969, but my arrival as the superintendent 4 years ago, have made a commitment to keeping your class sizes small and have made a commitment to keeping your buildings up to par. And that includes things like ventilation. So we did not have to rebuild our system in order to respond to this. We were very, very lucky in that way. And that's a credit to all of the folks who've been through this process a million times and been at town meetings and supported school budgets. And quite honestly, we have taken our responsibilities very seriously. We are not wasteful. We have not been wasteful, and this budget obviously reflects that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dawn Fattori. I know that Leslie Leon, our chair from Dover, will say a few words after her, and then I believe Maggie will take over for the region, if that's okay.
Thanks. Go ahead, Dawn.
Gordon, can I share my screen?
Co-host. I just made you. Oh, maybe I didn't hit OK.
I was going to say, still says I'm disabled. Here we go.
Oh, you got it now?
Yep.
Okay.
Perfect. So we're going to share with you tonight an abbreviated presentation that we did at our open hearing for the Dover School Committee. So the assumptions that we use when building the budget is that hopefully we're going to be in person 5 days a week with regular school operations. And we're projecting right now to have level enrollment. I will let the town know that we have received some federal and state funding for fiscal year 22, which will help us cover any continued operational impacts that we may potentially still have from COVID-19. So no additional expenses in relation to COVID-19 are incorporated into the budget we're presenting tonight. As Rob and Gordon noted, we built this in compliance with your budget guidance, which is level service or reduced expenditures. And then for our own purposes, we align this with our district strategic plan. We are in the third year of a very wide range strategic plan, and we always make sure that our budgets are supporting that so that we can continue to move that forward. And again, as I mentioned, we built this budget with acute awareness of potential post-COVID-19 state and local budget financial constraints. So if you recall, we look at the school budget in Dover in two distinct buckets. One is our in-district, so that's the operations of Chickering itself. And in that budget, payroll represents approximately 85% of our total budget. Majority of our employees are in contractual agreements. Those increases for fiscal year 22 were approximately 2%. In addition to the step and lane increases that we incurred for our educators, which range from 4 to 13%, depending on where the educator is in our matrix. As we do potentially have every year, what's helping our salary budget is several staffing changes and retirements. So just giving you an example, if a teacher's had a long tenure with us, they potentially are at the top of our matrix at a salary of in excess of $100,000. When we go to replace them, we're able to sort of reset the budget a little bit and put them down lower in our matrix, probably more in the range of 55 to 60,000. So when those retirements take place, we're able to sort of recognize a salary savings. And you'll see that when we show you what our salary increase was for fiscal year 22. We also do our special education staffing based on the projected student cohort. As you know, for special education, particular students might need particular staffing configuration. As those students move on to the middle school or leave our system, we're able to adjust our staffing, and that was actually taken into consideration this year's budget. The other big driver for us is obviously how many students are we going to have in the building. So we're projecting in the range of 462 to 465 students. We currently have 476. Based on our class size range of 17 to 22, we'll be maintaining the 24 classroom sections we currently have. However, what we've been experiencing the last couple of years is a shifting of the grade sections. Not all of our grades are the same number of students, so we move the staff around to accommodate the size of the cohorts. And as we've been doing for multiple years now, we're continuing our trend budgeting of all our operating accounts. So basically what that entails is that as we watch expenditures in a certain line item, if every year we have, we're not using it all or we're going over, we adjust that, and that's what we consider to be trend budgeting. And anytime we add expenses for one-time expenditures, say for new textbooks, we always make sure we back that out so it does not continue to roll with the budget from year to year. So the budget drivers on the other side of our, the other piece of our budget is out of district. So based on the regional agreements, Dover covers in their operating budget all residents pre-K through the age of 22 who are placed in an out of district placement. So that's where situations where we don't have the resources in district to educate the children, so we have to put them in outside placements. We're projecting 26 of those placements in fiscal year 22. That's down from 31 in fiscal year 21. If you take a look at our operating results from this year, you're going to see that we're actually over budget in out of district. But I think what I'm trying to share here is that the new placements that we added in fiscal year 21 were luckily offset by graduating or aging out placements. So instead of an increase in our out of district, you're going to see a decrease. The other large piece of out of district is transportation, and we participate with our Accept Collaborative for transportation, and therefore we're able to collaborate with all our area districts to efficiently transport students from other districts with our students to the same schools. So where does all that get us? Luckily for fiscal year 22, the school budget is a decrease from 22 to 21 of $3,000. If you look at it in the different pieces, we have an in-district increase of $73,000 and an out-of-district increase of $76,000. And just for comparative purposes, you'll see in fiscal year 21, we had a very small in-district increase, and predominantly that was because we were able to offset salary with, as I mentioned before, retirements and staffing changes. And we did see a huge increase in out-of-district in fiscal year 21. So we are continuing to see a reduction in out-of-district expenses, which is very favorable for the town. So if you want to look at sort of the nuts and bolts of our budget, you'll see, as I mentioned, that salaries and other compensation is about 86% of the in-district operating budget. If we had not, you'll see that salaries increased by 1.17%. If we did not have the salary savings from the retirements and the staffing changes, that would have been more like 3%. So that shows you the impact that we are able to experience from the retirements. And then you can see the continued trend budgeting in the other educational expenditures. The regular education transportation is basically our Conley bus contract. If you'll note in fiscal year 20, we did see some savings from the school closure. So that's why that number dips. And we've been able to maintain the same budget for our buildings and grounds, which is, we're able to spend smarter and make do with the same amount year after year, but still maintain the building in excellent condition. And then you can see the trend for out of district. And the one thing I like to point out, if you look at the expended years, 18, 19, and 20, then you see a large increase in the budget number for 20 and 21 and 22. That's where what we call circuit breaker reimbursement comes into play. And that's the money that the town receives from the state for support towards our out of district placement cost. So we do not take that in consideration when we build our budget, but at the end of the year, we do use it to offset cost. As you can see in fiscal year 21, it's approximately $1 million. So if you take the fiscal year 21 budget of $10,372,000, say we spent every dollar that we thought we were going to spend, and then we take circuit breaker into consideration, that number would go down to $9,372,000. So it's always important to remember where you're looking at our expenditure versus our budget, that you take in consideration our circuit breaker. And I'll turn over to Leslie for just some closing remarks.
And thank you, Dawn, for always being extremely thorough. We are lucky to have you. And we also want to thank the town of Dover and the community members for your continued support in educating the students of Dover.
Thanks, Don and Leslie. And now I'll turn it over to Maggie Sharon for the region.
Okay, and let me quickly just pull that one up.
Oh, so I should leave you as presenter?
I'm gonna run the PowerPoint for her.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, so much. I'm gonna let Dawn speak as we go through to the details of the budget, similarly to as we did for the local Dover budget. But I think Andrew said really everything that I want to say with regard to our budget, which I feel very proud to present tonight, specifically that our ability to continue to educate all of these students, both in person, remotely, in a hybrid model, and we're looking forward to a full return to school in a couple of weeks, is directly related to the commitment that both of our communities have made over all of these years to keep reasonable class sizes and to maintain our buildings in a really high state of readiness. I just want to commend all of those who've been involved over the many decades in making those decisions, because they're leading to our ability to present what I think is a really responsible budget tonight. And Dawn, do you want to go down the assumptions?
Sure. So I won't repeat ourselves. These are actually the same assumptions that we just talked about for Dover. They all completely apply to the region. So I don't think there's any more to say. Again, we're looking at having the region students back 5 days next year in person. And we have the same federal and state funding at the region as we do at Dover. And again, I think all those are actually all the same assumptions. So looking at the region's budget drivers, and I know there's a lot of information here, but just like the town does, the region has a lot of related benefits that definitely impact the increases or decreases that we see from year to year. Payroll represents approximately 80% of our total budget. Again, same contractual agreements as we have in Dover, with 2% across all bargaining units, and then obviously the educators ranging from 4 to 13. We did not add any new staffing positions for fiscal year 22. but we did see some salary savings, just like we did in Dover, from retirements and staffing changes. And basically what I mean staffing changes is someone may not retire but leave our system. And a lot of times that affords us the ability also to bring someone at a lower rate. Our healthcare premium increases, which I don't know if the town of Dover is shared, we're both in the same collaborative purchasing group, but we were lucky to see healthcare increases only at 3.4% this current year, and we're continuing to show a strong participation in the lower cost, high deductible healthcare plans. So we're thrilled that that level of participation has maintained from the 2 years ago when we moved over to the new plan designs. If you remember last year, we did establish an OPEB liability trust and made our first year of funding of the $500,000. We're excited then to be on that track, just like the town of Dover, to fund our liability and OPEB. And as you know, as you continue to fund, and for us too, we negotiated with our retirees to move the cost share from where it had been a 70-30 for so many years. We're moving towards a 50-50 cost share, which will be fully phased in fiscal year 24. All those steps that we are taking are driving down our total liability. We've already seen it go down from approximately 28 million to about 24 million, and we will see it continue to decrease as our discount rate is increased based on the steps that we're taking for funding. We were also fortunate this year for our Norfolk County retirement assessment to see a decrease, and that's because they did an updated actuarial valuation, but we also had a lower covered payroll for Dover Sherburne in conjunction with them also using some pension reserve funds to offset the member assessment. So that was definitely played in our favor for this year, and it also included assessments for fiscal year 23, so we know that trend is going to continue. As we mentioned from Dover, just like we do with the region, we do the trend budgeting, and you will see that if you look at our detailed budget, you'll see lots of line items that are being decreased, and that's because we're recognizing that we don't need the budget that we've been carrying. And just like Dover, obviously student enrollment plays two factors here. One is obviously our school operations, but it also impacts your assessments. Because the assessment percentage is based on enrollment. Dover,
yeah, no, that's all right.
Dover actually saw a decrease in their assessment percentage this year, 0.63% in operating and 0.65 in capital. And that tends to fluctuate from year to year, but it's always usually within the 3% range that it fluctuates between Dover and Sherburne. And
I think that in addition to these drivers, and I know, Dawn, you mentioned it, one thing that I'm really excited about, and that is, I think, really important for Dover and for our locals in general, is this decision and this ability and the tackling a couple of years ago of that retiree benefit split that was different at the region than it was at the locals. I think that was a hard nut to crack. I really appreciate all of the district folks who partnered with the employee benefits group at the school committee to take that on. And it's that movement away from the 70-30 and towards the 50-50 that everyone gets at the locals that's allowed us to set up that trust, and that has allowed us to really tackle that liability that I know is impactful to our bottom line and hopefully will positively impact our need to borrow and just in general our discount rate and in our financial health. So I'm really appreciative, Dawn, of the willingness of your department and the district to take that on. And I think combined with moving towards that high deductible option has been a really stabilizing force in our benefits numbers over the last few years and looking forward.
Yes, all good points, Maggie. Thank you. So looking at our, where does that get us? Our overall operating budget increased by $226,000. You'll notice that it doesn't necessarily translate into what the Dover's assessment was because of there are some, and as I show you in the revenues, there are some revenues that the region is able to offset the budget with, but then the decrease in the assessment in Dover is why you're seeing a decrease in your overall cost of of operating the region. And that's compared to a 1.59% increase in fiscal year 21. And then you can see, because Sherburne picked up increase in the assessment, why they're seeing actually a $186,000 increase this year compared to what they did in fiscal year 21. So just like we did for Dover, we thought we'd just show you a little bit more about the details. So this is the revenue summary for the region. As you can see, the largest pieces are the assessments we receive from Dover and Sherburne. Then we have Chapter 78 from the state, along with Chapter 71, which is the reimbursement for transportation. And then there are some fees that we collect from various activities. And the last line item is what we consider to be our free cash, excess and deficiency. So we are applying $210,000 of our excess and deficiency to this operating budget for fiscal year 22. So those are our revenues, and then this is how we spend those funds. And obviously, as we mentioned, salaries and other compensation and benefits are over 80%. And then you can see the other expenditures. Again, that's where we're continuing to see the trend budgeting with a $75,000 decrease. Transportation, again, is our here at the region. It's in addition to the regular education, it's also the cost we have for athletic transportation. And then for buildings and grounds, we continue to maintain the whole campus here the best we can. And we actually saw a small decrease on that. It's minimal, but we actually did a communications audit of our telephone bills, and we're able to reduce them by, I think, was $7,000, which is why you're seeing the $2,900 decrease. And then again, we're still carrying some debt on the middle school, but that's been going down every year, and it's scheduled to be fully redeemed by 2025.
So Dawn, I just want to say a huge thank you, not only to you and also to our whole district leadership, Dr. Keogh, Ms. McCoy, Ms. McCarthy, and all our building department leaders who work together to create this budget, which we feel is responsive, responsible, supporting needed teaching and learning goals, strategic plan goals, and meeting our rapidly changing needs as they relate to running schools in a pandemic. Especially to you, Dawn, and you and your team have just done exceptional work relating to responding to this challenge every year, and especially this year. We cannot say enough about your ability to be transparent and vigilant with our resources, and just really helping all of us and our local representatives feel comfortable with the budgets of the region. I want to also say a huge thank you to all of the town boards and committees who support us, and to all of the charitable organizations, DSEF, our PTOs, and other grantors for making the donations that have helped us over the years. Mudge Foundation, Football Positive, the Nita Bank Lighters, and all of the other folks who have been able to support these schools to keep them in the fantastic state that they are, and hopefully will be for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn, Maggie, Leslie, Dr. Keogh. First of all, Dawn, can you make me the host again?
Sure.
Thanks. So with that, I'd like to solicit any citizen comment, feedback, questions. Is there anyone who would like to ask a question? Please respond with your name and address. All right. Hearing none, we'll move on to Article 5, capital budget. Barry, are you?
We do have one comment.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead. Who had a comment?
Justine. Justine, you're still on mute.
Justine?
Sorry, I sent a comment to Jim Rapetti. Maybe Jim didn't get it, but just, now that we've all been walking around a lot more during this last year with COVID, I see a lot of school buses when I'm on my 1 to 3 mile walk that often are empty or have 1 or 2 kids. It bothers me. I mean, I was on the Dover School Committee for 6 years. I remember the buses being a heck of a lot more full than they are now. Is there some other way? I'd like to see, I guess it's a comment, I'd like to see some other way to get the kids transported at less cost with, you know, than what I see now with empty buses. That's my comment.
Well, I will comment for the buses right now. We do have COVID regular protocols, so we have a lot of parents driving their students, and also because of safety issues, they prefer to drive them. We were limited to a third of the capacity on the buses, and that's just now been released a little bit. So now that we can put, you know, a few more kids on the buses. But if you saw buses this year, it was a totally different scenario than it would be in a normal school year.
Not to argue, but we're talking 2 or 3 kids on a bus. I mean, it's
yeah, there's more.
It's
yeah,
bizarre.
Yeah,
You know,
you must be seeing them at the beginning of the routes, because when they come here, there's way more than 2 or 3 on a bus when they're unloading.
I totally understand too, like observationally, I've seen the same thing. I've since learned like my area is at the beginning of a bus route for certain things. And I do have to say this year has been particularly weird in the busing department, because not only do we have to plan for like only 1 kid or 2 kids in some situations can sit on every seat, but you know, we have to plan to transport all the kids who, you know, get transportation. And yet the reality is a lot of families have, for their own family's personal safety, decided to drive kids. And, you know, as an environmentalist, this drives me bonkers in terms of like gas use. And also as a person helping to run schools, I totally get it, because the bus is like not the best place for COVID like experiences with small children and even teenagers. So I hear you. And I think definitely moving out of this, it's something we will look at for years to come for sure.
It's also, if I could just add, Justine, it's also mandatory that we have seating charts on these buses. So this in some ways is an unusual year, because typically, you know, people will say express interest in the bus and then we'll never see the kids again. But in this particular case, people tend to be using the bus, and we have to track who's on those buses, because if in fact somebody were sick, then those other students sitting near them would be considered a close contact. But you're right, Maggie's right, Don's right. The numbers are definitely down because people have chosen not to participate. But in fact, I think at the beginning of the year, we were even looking at whether or not we would need to run as many buses or potentially more. And it actually turned out that the bus numbers that we had was the appropriate number, we believe.
Great, thanks. Are there any other citizen or public comments, questions? All right, I'd like to turn over to Barry Goldman for the capital budget, Article 5. Barry, I've been told you're Dover subscribers. Is that you? Oh no, there's 2 Dover subscribers.
That's me. That's one of them.
All right. Now that I see your video, I know which one you are, so I can.
I think John is on also.
Hi, this is John Quackenbush from 86 Walpole, and I'm going to be running the slides for Barry. So if you can make me presenter, that would be great.
I will do that. Bear with me just one moment. All right, you should be a presenter now, so should be able to do that.
All right.
Yeah.
Got them?
I see them.
Perfect. All right, ready to begin, Barry?
Let's go right ahead. You can go to slide number 2.
Just to remind you, try to speak loudly so that folks can hear you. There have been some folks have had some difficulty.
Okay, we'll try.
Thank you.
The departments submit requests over $10,000 for our review at capital budget. We're then responsible for preparing the annual capital budget for use by all the town boards and departments in their deliberations. And we also request 5-year capital budget projections from each department and the regional school committee. And you'll see in a later slide how that's presented. So we've established guidelines for departments so that the guidelines are as objective as possible. And they focus on condition and age of asset, cost of repairs, depreciation and salvage if there's any, the redundancy of the equipment, and the projected asset life. We've worked very closely with almost every department to determine these protocols so that they benefit them in determining when they should be replacing assets, and they help us in determining, in helping us in our due diligence. This year, we have presented requests from the Cemetery Commission, Fire Department, Police Department, Chickering, and the Selectmen. And as you see, the Selectmen far outweigh all the other requests. This is the era of the roof replacement. And we're starting this year. The roof replacement for the townhouse will be about 70% of the budget this year at $700,000. So we're at $1,036,000 for the entire budget, which is in excess of the approximately $400,000 that we normally spend. The average spend for the town has been about $400,000 for the last 10 years. And we'll go to the next. This is the spreadsheet starting with FY22 going to 26. And if you look down, you will see the budget increasing for the regional school starting in 23. 24 is another replacement, and 25 is another replacement, and then it goes back to normal. So those are all roof replacements. In 25, we start to have some replacements at the fire department and at the police department. So we have a record budget for 25. And these changes are one of the reasons that we're suggesting the creation of a capital reserve account. And you'll hear more on that later. The next slide is, you can see graphically represented the projection for the next 5 years. This year is primarily, again, the roof of the townhouse. And next year is comprised primarily of school roofs. And then going back to normal after the roof era in FY26. Next slide. The Capital Budget Committee is also responsible for overseeing Green Communities grants. And what we've tried to do is improve energy efficiency with projected savings greater than the cost, so that it always results in a net saving to the town. We've shown this by getting grants for most of the buildings in town, with a focus on the protective service building, where the project has just been completed. And we hope to have a 30 to 40% savings annually for fuel savings. Another result is the decrease of fossil fuels, with the hopeful goal of reaching carbon neutrality eventually, and meeting our goal of 20% per annum energy efficiency improvements. And hopefully someday upgrade the town building codes and construction practices. In FY22, we have two potential projects. One is at the regional schools with replacement of domestic hot water systems and ductwork insulation. The other is to repair the cold water booster with a new frequency drive, much more efficient than the present pump. Those are $187,000. We are potentially qualified for up to $250,000, but it's likely that we'll get a percentage of the $187,000 based upon the efficiency improvements. As I mentioned before, completed project was the protective service building. That was partially paid for by a Green Community Grant. And we're looking to pay back that system over about a 3 to 4 year period. So after that, the system will generate positive cash flow because of its much higher efficiency. A new project that hasn't been started yet, but we passed for FY21 is replacing the original 1923 windows with much more high efficiency windows. We expect that to save about 40% in heating and air conditioning costs, resulting in about a 10 to 12 year payback. And the windows have at least a 20 to 25 year life. So we will be generating, again, positive cash flow by taking this step of replacing the windows. Hopefully, we'll have some future projects that qualify for green communities. We'd like to see replacing of the oil-based heating systems with new high-efficiency heat pumps for both heating and cooling. That could take place in the townhouse and the library. That's a fairly long-term projected project. In all of the town buildings, we could replace heating and air conditioning controls with new energy management systems. Those systems can reduce electrical power costs, which are very expensive because of early morning demand charges, which increase the electric power cost by 30 to 40%. New heating controls, heating and air conditioning controls will even out the use of electrical power and considerably reduce the demand charges. And in the new Carroll Community Center, we've had the opportunity to look at a building from a new build or a renovation, a substantial renovation. And in both cases, we can produce much more energy efficiency and possibly being very close to LEED certification or LEED certifiable. We've taken a look at the strict code minimums that are available for the American Society of Heating. And we're striving to meet those code levels. We're going to get very close to net zero energy use. And there'll be no fossil fuels used, all electric. And we're making it available for solar electric power. It's not part of the plan right now, but the roof will be available if we like to use that. We measure energy efficiency by energy use intensity, and we're getting very close to 30 kBTUs per square foot a year, which is probably the best you can get. It's very close to net zero. For example, the present building, the Carroll Community Center, without air conditioning and without an extensive electrical system, runs at about 90 kBTUs. So about 3 times what we would use for a brand new facility. And I'd like to thank my committee. We've been very busy this year. We have very talented people. We've done a lot of due diligence. We'd like to thank the town departments for cooperating. Sometimes we ask too many questions. But it's all in the idea of efficiency and paying properly for capital assets.
Great, thank you, Barry.
Any
Oh, sorry. That was it, right? Is that it?
Yes.
Great, okay. Are there any citizen comments on Article 5? All right, if there are no comments, I will turn it over to Robin Hunter to talk about the Capital Stabilization Fund and then the Article 12, appropriate for one-time projects, water resources. So Robin, there you are. Just need to, oops, you keep moving on me. So I'm going to make you a co-host. Or is Chris presenting for you, Robin?
I can present myself.
Okay. Just made you a co-host. So.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. I'm Robin Hunter. I'm on the Board of Selectmen. Before I go through the 4 slides that I have prepared with respect to the Capital Budget Stabilization Fund, I thought what I would do is just take a little stroll down memory lane to let you all know how we got to where we are. So as you all know, the Board of Selectmen approximately 3 years ago started an initiative to try and stabilize the tax rate. Now, we worked closely with the Warrant Committee and identified this as an issue citizens wanted us to focus on. As part of this initiative, we looked at the drivers, what was driving the tax rate. And we focused on 3 core areas. First of all, the budget. And looking at the budget, we recognized that what we really needed to do was really focus on trend-based budgeting and not budget against our budget. That way, we weren't having excessive amounts returned to our cash reserves. Secondly, we looked at revenues. We wanted to make sure that we had a robust revenue forecast model. Again, not having that tool also resulted in overages in the tax rate and excessive amounts returned to our cash reserves. In addition, we thought it was very important for us to focus on the long-range outlook, not to just focus on the current budget, which we pass at every town meeting, but to look at the town's needs going out 5, 10, 15 years, and to begin to plan with those. So as part of this initiative, one of the things we did look at was our cash reserves. At town meeting, frequently we discuss our free cash, which really is our cash reserves. So how we focused on these cash reserves was we brought in some consultants to help us look at best practices. And we also reached out to other towns that we use as comp towns to understand how they look at their cash reserves. And one of the items that we found was consistent amongst our peer towns was that your cash, every town needs liquidity. And what liquidity or how liquidity is defined, it is defined as cash reserves that are not designated for a certain cause. So typically what that is your free cash balance plus any stabilization funds that are undesignated. That to have, if you take a look at AAA rated towns, which are towns that we compare ourselves to, those towns have cash reserves of about 10 to 15% of their operating budget. In addition to those cash reserves, these towns have stabilization funds. What stabilization funds are is they are special purpose funds where cash is put aside for a specific cause. Many of those towns have a capital budget stabilization fund. As you are all aware, at town meeting about 2 years ago, the town meeting approved a stabilization fund for Dover's share of the region's OPEB liability, as well as for Dover's liability, OPEB liability. And this evening, what I want to talk to the town about is establishing a capital budget stabilization fund. So what is a capital stabilization fund? It really is a special purpose savings account to be used solely for the purchase and replacement of capital. It is very similar to what asset managers utilize. They call it a replacement reserve fund. Every asset manager is aware that capital items such as roofs, automobiles need to be replaced. They don't last forever. And so what you do is you go out and have a study done that looks at your capital over the next 30 years and provides you with a timeline for when you can expect those capital items to be replaced. And the town did just that. We put reports in place for all of our buildings so that we can now look out 20 years and determine or have an idea of what will need to be replaced. Why we're recommending doing this is it really is going to help smooth the spikes in the tax rate due to the variability in capital requests. Looking back over the last 10 years, we've had capital requests on a given budget year that range from somewhere around $100,000 to $2 million. So having this fund set up will allow us to make contributions each year to stabilize the tax rate and then utilize the funds in this capital stabilization fund to pay for capital going forward. The funds are, the only way these funds can be used is with a 2/3 vote at town meeting. So what I thought I'd do is just take a little step back, and I'm going to reiterate some of the comments that I've already made. But how it works right now is our cash reserves are just in a general fund. It has been Dover's policy to return any free cash into a general fund that isn't earmarked for anything. Now, at town meetings, occasionally, we will ask the town to allow us to use some of those funds to pay for capital or other one-time expenditures. But primarily, our capital is funded through the tax levy. What we're proposing with this fund, and we looked at the reports that we got, looking out 20 years to see what our capital replacement expectations would be. We are proposing to take $2.5 million of our free cash balance. This is our cash reserves that aren't earmarked for anything. Move that into a capital stabilization fund, and then each year contribute 1.5% of the tax levy into this fund. And this fund will build up over time as we utilize it to pay for capital expenditures. And by allocating the 1.5% over a given year, it's going to smooth out the tax rate. So we won't see spikes in the tax rate. Not only can these funds be used to replace equipment, but they can also be used to service debt if we choose to raise debt for some of our capital expenditures. So again, it's a way to smooth out any spikes in the tax rate. You may ask, it's worked for us the way we've been doing things over the years, so why change now? What are you trying to do? And there are a couple of reasons to change. And again, we've spent a lot of time with outside consultants looking at best practices in other towns. And what this will do is it will give us fiscal discipline. We will be saving for the future. We will be looking at future expenditures, so nothing or very little will be unexpected. It also provides fiscal transparency. The funds in this capital stabilization account, they're earmarked for capital only. They cannot be used for anything other than capital replacements. Again, it's fiscal accountability. It is a best practice. And most importantly, what it does, it eliminates the unintended consequence of returning free cash, which is really just a rebate. When we return free cash to taxpayers, what it results in is a one-time reduction in your tax bill. And the following year, you're making up for that reduction plus any increase in the tax levy. And we put together a little example of how this works. And we took a $1 million rebate. And in scenario number one, we are showing the impact this would have on a median homeowner on your tax bill. So if there was no free cash utilized to lower the levy, what happens is you get a gradual increase in your tax bill. When you use free cash to lower the tax levy, in year number one, you will have a $245 decrease to your tax bill. However, the following year, you will see a $690 increase to your tax bill because you will have to make up the difference of the savings that you recouped in year number one, plus any increases to the tax rate. So this is how utilizing these stabilization funds will help stabilize the tax rate. And that, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them now.
Great, thanks, Robin. Does anyone have any questions? If so, please identify yourself with your name and address. Justine, did you have a question?
Sure, I always have questions. I've become, for those of you who know Henry Grew, I've become Henry Grew. I guess the three comments I have, first of all, Robin, it was a very clear presentation. Thank you. What is our current free cash position? I have three questions. That's my first question.
So our current free cash position will be approximately $10 million. If we utilize this $2.5 million, and we also, what's the other thing I'm missing, Chris?
That's the last article on the warrant, which is the free cash to reduce the tax rate, made up of the circuit breaker and the other amount that I don't think the warrant committee has. Well, I think that's later in the presentation if they're going to.
Right. So approximately another 1.5 million. It brings the cash reserves to around the 10 or 15% of the total operating budget.
Okay, and so with the I guess the second question, with the stabilization fund, and I hear what you're saying, Robin, about the comparable towns have between 10 and 15% of their operating budget, as I understand it, in cash. But with this creation of this
in liquidity, in undesignated in
Right.
undesignated funds.
Correct, but what is the typical thing with the reserved funds that you're talking about with this capital budget? What are comparable towns with the AAA ratings? How large is that percent? When
Well,
you
there's some towns, like our neighbor Needham has a $45 million capital funds.
How big is their budget? I mean, you know.
We tried to, we actually did a quick survey of some of the other towns, and they also ranged, those that would give us their numbers, they ranged between $400,000 and $2 million. And we, you know, it was just a handful of towns that we surveyed.
I mean, my overall comment seems pretty large, but and my third comment is.
Let me explain why. You know, what we did was we looked at the next 30 years, what we're expecting to spend. And we looked at the next 5 years where we have some very large replacements. And so it's basically math. We said, how much should we recommend to seed this account so that we could continue to grow the account to fund future capital needs, in addition to fund those short-term large capital expenditures that we know that we have. So that's how we came up with the $2.5 million.
Okay, and we
wanted to make sure that we could grow it and utilize it and maintain a stable contribution to the account over time, so as not to get an increase or a spike in the tax rate.
Okay.
Justine, what's your third
And
question?
my last question is the 1.5% increase, is that voted on annually by town meeting or what? You said the capitalization fund would be 2.5 mil with the 1.5% increase every year.
A one of the operating budget, yes. I mean, you can't do anything without coming to town meeting.
Yeah, okay,
every year, you know, we would take a look.
You make a transfer.
Right, well, we would take a look at the balance in the account. We would take a look at future expenditures, you know, and we would have to analyze. You wouldn't just contribute 1.5% if it wasn't necessary, based upon what you were seeing as a trend and based upon what you know would need to be replaced. But we have, you know, what we're trying to illustrate here is a system that we're thinking would work to put in place, and everything would need to be approved by town meeting.
Right. So in other words, it's not a COLA increase or anything like that. That's what I was saying.
And that's a good point. You know, we would look at the balance every year. You know, the schools have used these capital reports for the last 5 years, and again, it's a placeholder of when you think. It doesn't mean if the report says in 2015 you have to replace your roof, or 2025 that you're actually going to replace your roof. In 2023 and 2024, you'll begin to look and talk to contractors and get proposals and see if you need to replace your roof or not. But it just gives us a better idea. It helps us to plan. And that's what we're trying to do. You know, I know you're a banker, and this is what asset managers do as well.
Robin, it's Bonnie Akins. Have you thought, are you going to borrow for any of these 30-year projects?
Yeah, that's an option as well. And, you know, some towns borrow and, you know, they utilize these stabilization funds.
Yeah, Robin, this town has borrowed and paid for, and in the last 10 years maintained their buildings. And you are now proposing to use $10 million that has not been returned to the taxpayers.
Well, Bonnie, allow me to correct you. I am not.
You're only proposing to use $2.5 million of the 10 that's sitting, but every year for the past 5 years, free cash has grown and grown and grown and grown. And we've used only a little bit at every town meeting.
So allow me again to reiterate some of the points that I made. We looked carefully at why free cash has grown at the rate it's grown. And we can contribute that to a number of factors. One, budgeting. So we changed that. There are like many sides to this equation. We changed the budgeting approach. This year, we returned 2% of the total budget, which is not bad budgeting, given the fact that
Well, except for the,
Bonnie, please allow me.
The $1 million for the.
Bonnie, allow me to finish, please. I listened to you. Please allow me to finish my answer. All right. So in municipal accounting, it's cash based. So you need to budget for contingencies. We also looked at the revenue side of the equation. So we were also overtaxing on the revenue side because we were underestimating things like new growth. The new assessor has done a phenomenal job building a model and ensuring, trying to do better. It's hard to forecast. So we have returned less.
And Robin, we don't have a lot of new growth because we don't have any new huge developments.
Bonnie, it was just an example.
Okay.
There are other things. There are personal property taxes as well that we have.
Very minimal for Dover.
All right, Bonnie. Again, we were returning $400,000 to $500,000 on the recap from that side of the equation. The other thing we have done is we're not maximizing the tax levy. So we still have capacity in the tax levy. So we're reducing the amount of tax levy, which also is going to reduce the growth in free cash. So we are doing a lot of things to reduce that. We're also looking at all liabilities that need to be funded. We are cognizant. And I believe
Robin, I'm a huge supporter of OPEB. I'll just ask one more question. What are the towns that you are comparing to us? Towns of 6,000 people or towns of 25,000 people?
Different sizes, Bonnie. We looked at Medway, we looked at Millis, we looked at Medfield. We looked at a whole lot of other towns. I don't have the list in front of me.
Okay, fine. That's all.
Are there any other questions or citizen comments?
It was from Bonnie. There was a question in the chat room.
Gotcha. Okay, so I think with that, Robin, we can move on to the Water Resources, Article 12.
Gordon, if you give me one for 20 seconds just to show something, then I'm going to turn it over to Ron.
Gordon, this is the free cash ask for the Board of Selectmen.
Okay.
You want me to wait for Jerry or do you?
I don't have access to be able to show him. Chris interrupted. I don't know where we are. Who's controlling the meeting so that I can just show something?
I'm making you a co-host. Okay, there you go.
Okay, and then I'll turn it over to Ron.
Okay. But we do have another article that I think Robin, are you presenting the Water Resources?
Yes.
Okay.
So the Water Resources Committee was started almost 4 years ago. If you remember, almost 4 years ago, we had a serious drought in this Commonwealth and in New England. And then again, last year, we saw a repeat, perhaps not in the same nature, but nevertheless equally a problem. And in case there's any thought that these were anomalous effects, this is the announcement that came out as a result of last week's state meeting. So this is a repetitive situation that we have to understand. And then the other thing I'd mention is, I'm sure everybody pretty much saw these. I'm trying to run it with one only screen here. And we last year spent a lot of time putting up notifications for people, whether it was on the town common or lawn signs, all of them urging people to conserve water. That said, I'm going to turn it over to Ron, who's going to go into the point that when we asked for the original funding in the 2018 town meeting, we specifically said this was not a one-off, that we would in fact see the need to continue the process because the data that we would acquire in year one would need to be would need to be successfully followed by year to get a pattern. Ron? Where is he?
Ron, I made you a co-host, so you should be able to share your screen.
Okay, I'm happy to speak right now. I just wasn't sure if this is my place or whether this was Robin's floor right now. Robin, can you clarify this?
Sorry, I was on mute. It is mine right now, Ron.
Okay.
But it was a great introduction that Jerry made for me. So
Absolutely. So it's all yours, Robin. Thanks.
right. So Jerry, thank you for setting the stage. So I don't have a presentation here. What I'm going to talk about is just a request by the selectmen to utilize $100,000 of free cash to help us so that we can hire a consultant who will work with the Water Resource Task Force and the Water Resource Committee to help the town put in place a strategic plan for water. As Jerry pointed out, over the last couple of years, we've seen a recurrence of droughts in the area. The town supported, I think it was 3 years ago, the use of $150,000 to put in monitoring wells. Those monitoring wells were to establish a baseline for water. It is really important to the town, given that we only have one source of water, the aquifer beneath us, to understand what the limitations of that resource, to look at what the town might have to do in the event that that resource becomes depleted. None of us are experts in this area, and we really do need to hire to look at this and be strategic about it, and to hire water experts to assist us to put a plan in place. And for that, we are requesting $100,000. We reached out to some consultants, and that was a ballpark of what they thought this study may cost.
Ron, did you have anything else you wanted to add, or is that everything?
Just add a few thoughts. Really, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I'll add just a few thoughts from participating on this committee now for 4 years. We did quite a bit of work to get a baseline. As Robin indicated, we put monitoring wells, about 15 monitoring wells throughout the town. We have measuring devices that are monitoring what happens to groundwater over the course of every year that they're running right now. They've been running for a couple of years. And we've also talked with our consultant about some ideas on what they recommend to continue that monitoring program going forward. I envision that's all going to be rolled up into this $100,000 amount to implement those recommendations for continuing to monitor, to realize now we have a baseline and we need to continue to follow through so we understand what happens over time. Droughts happen, rainfall happens, and we have trends up and down. But what's happening over the course of 4 years, 5 years, 10 years? The only way to do that is to have data, be able to see what happens over time. That's all I'll add, so thank you.
Great, thank you. Are there any citizen comments with regard to this article? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to Article 15, amend zoning bylaws for accessory apartments. Carol, do you have slides you want to present?
I have slides.
What's that?
I have the slides. If you can make me co-host, I'm going to run the show for Carol to present.
Done.
So I'm Carol Chirico. I'm the chair of the planning board, and Courtney Starling, who is providing the slides, is our land use director. So the slides are pretty brief, so I'm going to talk a little bit more as we go through each slide. But we are amending an existing bylaw that was passed in 1986 that allows for accessory apartments. We believe it's important to amend the existing bylaw because the language is ambiguous and the process is a bit cumbersome, and it really is difficult for both the property owner and those charged with enforcing it. So this new bylaw is intended to clarify and streamline the process. And I'll get into a little bit more detail, but first let me say that the bylaw includes a definition of an accessory dwelling unit, which is not in our current bylaw. So I'm going to read that definition. It's more detailed than what you see on the screen, but what you see is some images of what an accessory dwelling unit could look like. The proposed definition is an apartment within a single family dwelling or an attached structure that is accessory to a single family home, that is a second self-contained separate housekeeping unit, inclusive of sleeping, cooking, and sanitary facilities. This unit is subordinate in size to the principal dwelling, and construction or renovation of such unit is done in a manner to maintain the appearance and essential character of a single family dwelling. So I guess, Courtney, you can flip to the next slide. So in addition to clarifying the process, the new bylaw makes a few other substantive changes. It applies to all single-family homes in Dover, not just those constructed before 1986, which is the current bylaw can only be used by structures that were built before 1986. It clarifies that an accessory dwelling unit can be a separate structure, like a barn or another freestanding structure. And it requires more restrictive side and rear yard setbacks. So essentially side and rear yard setbacks that would apply to a single family home versus a different type of accessory structure on the property. We've thought a lot about this on the planning board and why we think it's important to have an accessory dwelling unit bylaw that is more available to more people, and the types of scenarios that we envision is a family that wants a separate living space for a nanny or a caretaker, somebody who cares for animals on the property or cares for the grounds. Also, you know, as is quite relevant during COVID, sort of a unit for an adult child who comes home but still wants some autonomy, or also an older family member. There are long-term residents who do not want to leave Dover, and allowing an accessory dwelling unit would provide for rental income for them possibly, or on the flip side, a senior could move into an accessory dwelling unit and make the house available for younger relatives who could care for the property or care for the senior. So we see that it provides a lot of flexibility for single-family homeowners. I mentioned also that the process is clarified. Just to very briefly run through the process, a single-family property owner would come to the planning board with elevations showing conditions before and after construction, compliance with Massachusetts building code regarding ingress and egress, and as I said, compliance with setback, parking, and stairway provisions in the bylaw. The planning board would review, pursuant to site plan review, any unit over 900 square feet would be subject to a special permit, and there would be an architectural design review associated with that special permit. And finally, the Board of Health is, once you go through the process with the planning board, the Board of Health would approve any alterations to water or wastewater systems as required by the health code and building code. And that would be required before a building permit would be issued. So that's the bylaw amendment in a nutshell. Courtney, would you like to add anything? Did I skip over anything?
Let's see here. Am I muted? Can you hear me?
The one thing that we didn't mention is that they would not be able to be utilized for short-term rentals like VRBO or Airbnb. And that is included in the bylaw as well.
Are you ready for the last slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
This, I guess the last slide is sort of for town meeting, but that's okay.
It's always helpful to understand what happens if what happens in either direction.
The one thing about the new bylaw, we are in sync with the state legislature because they recently amended Chapter 40A, which is the state's zoning act. They amended it by stating that certain changes to zoning bylaws, accessory dwelling units being one of them, do not need a 2/3 majority of town meeting to pass. So in this case, this could pass by a simple majority at town meeting. So that's essentially it. Both Courtney and I are happy to answer questions. I'd also say that we intend to have a public hearing on the amendment in April. We will have the final draft of the zoning bylaw amendment available before then. We're still making a few tweaks.
Great, thanks Carol and Courtney. Are there any citizen comments or questions? Courtney, would you mind taking or unsharing your screen?
Gordon, Justine has a question.
Oh, Justine has a question. All right. Justine.
Yeah, and I've already talked to Courtney and Carol about this, and I'm very happy that they're going to be including language concerning short-term rentals so that we don't become a town. We're already advertised, not very much, I might add, on Airbnb for a few rooms in Dover. The second thing we did talk, Courtney and Carol and I talked about earlier in the day, is I compared the 1986 bylaw to this current one. And while I'm in agreement with many of the things that they're suggesting, I was concerned by the fact that the 1986 bylaw requires that an owner be a resident at least in one of the two units, either the big one or the small accessory unit. And I'm a little bit, I'm hoping that that language will be retained in the proposed bylaw. And I think they're thinking about it now. And the last comment I had is now gone out of my mind, I'm an old adult woman, but it will no doubt arise. Oh, yes, I know what it was, Carol and Courtney. The issue, I still don't understand the issue about the majority vote. If we vote for this by a majority vote at town meeting, does that mean that all future zoning changes in Dover are by major? Okay, thank you. I think the answer is no.
No.
Okay, thank you.
The only change that has to 40A that has changed the vote for simple majority pertains to accessory dwelling units and an open space residential bylaw. The only thing we're looking at right now are the accessory dwelling units, but we'll probably see OSRD bylaws for cluster subdivisions next year.
Okay, thank you. That's it for me. Thank you.
Great. Are there any other citizen comments? All right, then we'll move on. Next, Chris, you were going to present on a couple other, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. Bonnie Eakins. You were going to present on Article 16 and 17. Do you need to share your screen?
Yeah, I'm happy to. These were on the warrant last year. They're on the warrant again. I don't know which is the first one.
16, property tax deferral for seniors.
So this is the one we're reducing the rate, the interest rate on deferred taxes.
Yeah.
Yes. So the Board of Assessors voted more than a year ago to reduce the tax rate from 8% to 4% on deferred taxes for those taxpayers who qualify. It's a very limited range of income that qualifies. We would hope there's unanimous approval for this reduction in interest rate.
All right, are there any questions or citizen comments on Article 16? Article 17 is the property tax exemption amount.
This is to raise, there is a income exemption that gives you a break on your taxes if $1,000, and we have voted that we will accept the state limitation of $2,000 with the approval of town meeting. Very few people qualify, but we think it's reasonable.
Are there any citizen comments or questions? All right. Now, Chris.
Where do you want me to pick up on, Gordon, with 18, the taxation fund?
Yes, the eligibility to disable taxation, so 18, 19. Actually, you know what? I just realized no, I'm sorry. I'm probably going to have Carol Jackman go ahead of you. That's okay.
No problem.
Carol, do you want to go over the cemetery bylaws really quickly? Is Carol here?
Yep, I'm here.
Do you need to present, Carol?
I am just gonna go through and highlight what our changes are that we would hope to be approved. Under the Article 3 in the cemetery bylaws, basically it says that only family members can be buried within their plot. And we thought about that, and you know, that's their property. They've bought that plot. And if they have a dear friend who has no relatives and needs a place, that they should be allowed to bury that person within the lot. So that we were changing the verbiage to so state that it's at the discretion of the owner as to who will be buried within the plot that they have purchased, rather than us telling them you can't do it unless it's a family member. So we certainly can see no problem with that change. That would be Article 3 in the cemetery bylaws. Then on the Article 11, let me just state here a little background. Years ago, you only had full burials. Everybody was placed in a casket, and you never really heard of cremations. Well, in this day and age, more and more cremations are happening. And if you own a plot in Dover, let's say you have a plot with 2 burials, 2 full burials. Well, if you have cremations, you're allowed 3 cremations per lot. So you could bury 6 cremations in there. And as a result, it's, as I say, becoming more and more popular. But another request that has been made of the commissioners a lot is a husband and wife. The husband died, let's say, back in the early 70s, and the wife passes away. He was a full burial, but she's going to be in cremation, and she really wants to be with him. And we surveyed around, and this process is being accepted, where the cremation can be placed on top of the casket of the husband, so that that one plot is husband and wife. And we have one family in town that's certainly hoping, because they're holding the ashes in the hopes that she can be buried with her husband. And then they'd have the other lot that would be open for their children or whomever they wish to be buried there. So that is Article 11. And I do believe you can pick up our articles on our website so that you can read it fully. Then we move on to Article 14. Again, in the old days, people were buying cemetery plots for 4, 6, 8 members. Now they're seeing that they only need 2 plot spot, but they weren't allowed to put a headstone on it. So we are changing the verbiage there so that a headstone can be placed on a 2 grave lot or larger. They're still leaving the 1 grave lots with strictly the foot markers identifying the person there. And again, people have been requesting that. And then we move on to Article 18. And it really wasn't too clear as to who could purchase lots. It was sort of set up that you had to be living here within the town for 5 years and still be living here in order to purchase a lot. But that could be changed by the vote of the commissioners. And it has become so apparent that many people have to move out of Dover due to the cost of living. And they want to actually come back to Dover to be buried. So that we would like to have the first sentence of that bylaw change stated that it is the present or formerly 5-year residence here. We've had families whose children have grown up here for years. They want to come back home, and this is their home. We have a town clerk that used to live in town, and she wanted to come back here to be buried. And it had to go before the commissioners to vote that, to make it official. So we're hoping sincerely that you will allow that change within the verbiage. It's just sort of bringing all the situations at the cemetery up to date on the lifestyle of today. And that's it in a nutshell. And if anyone ever has any questions, they certainly can contact Rusty in the office, and he will contact one of us to get in touch with you. Or if you know us personally, you can certainly call any one of the members. It's Peg Crowley, who's just come on for her first year. Mariah Reese, who has been on now for 2 years. And then the old timer me, who just keeps on staying there, but being an old Doverite for over 50 years, that's my other home, and my family's there as well. So if anyone has any questions, taking your power away from you saying any questions now, but if anyone does have questions, please present them now.
All right, I don't see anyone. Does anyone have any questions? I'll ask one more time, just for the record.
Make it official.
Carol, this is Bob Springeth.
Hi, Bob.
I thought you did a great job. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Bob. You know, there's something about the cemetery. People don't think about there until it's time to go, and then they don't get to see. Take care. Please come in and visit. It's a beautiful cemetery. It's a gorgeous place to take your walks along the streets in there. And we're very, very proud of it, as everyone in Dover should be.
Yeah, and anybody should take Carol up on that because it is really a lovely spot.
Can I just say, I walk there all the time, and the joke in my family is I know more people in the cemetery than that live in Dover now.
Justine,
Yes.
I hate to tell you how many I babysat for in that cemetery and know them all personally.
Well, it's beautifully maintained, and especially with the snow, you've done a great job. Rusty's done a great job of keeping the pathways. Mr. Ripetti and his wife and my husband and I met there in the cemetery casually. And I think we're all amazed that other people had found the cemetery as a very walkable place.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. All right, it's running a little late here, so I'm going to see if Mark Howe wants to jump ahead of Chris and present on Article 24, Stagecoach Lane. Mark, are you prepared to do that right now? I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Oh, great. Okay, I'll wrap this up in about half hour. Ha ha ha. So, anyways, I am the manager of Kirby Farm LLC, and the development is off of Springdale. I'm sorry, not off of Springdale, off of Hartford Street, and we have a 9-lot subdivision, and we started it back in 2015 approximately, and we wrapped it up in right about 2020. We have completed everything that the town has requested, and I've got a citizen's petition in front of the town asking that the town approve the roadway so that the town can take it over and maintain it. Just as similar as the other roads the town controls and takes care of. All of the underground utilities will not be part of the town's responsibilities as far as the electric, and we've got not town water, but we've got colonial water up there. And we've got a couple of fire hydrants that are looking good, but not functional, as everyone knows. And we don't have any street lighting. Everything is private. So there'll hopefully be minimal upkeep. And that's kind of That's kind of it, Gordon.
Thanks, Mark. Does anyone have any questions or comments? All right, hearing none, I will move on to Chris, who will present pretty much everything else.
Thank you.
Starting with, so basically, well, Chris, actually, you're going to go through each of the articles individually, right?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay. We can just keep, and then we'll just keep comments till the end. So that way you can just get through the whole presentation and then people can ask their questions at the end.
Yeah, that sounds great. So I'll quickly run through Article 18, which is a senior tax relief program. I want to thank Janet Claypool, the town's COA director, and Amy Gao, the town's assessor, for assisting with the development of this proposal for the town. It represents a goal of the community, certainly the Board of Selectmen, as we heard here this evening, the Board of Assessors, to provide senior tax relief options to our residents. And as Bonnie had indicated earlier regarding Article 16 and 17, there are limited folks in town who qualify for those programs. So we thought that this was a complementary effort that provided a little bit more flexibility and a little bit more local control on senior tax relief. So on the next slide, just to quickly summarize what this is, this would establish a fund for donations to defray real estate taxes for elderly and disabled persons of low income. So the next slide details actually how this works. It's essentially a checkbox that would appear on residential tax bills that would allow individuals to voluntarily donate any amount of money to this fund. And that's how these funds are made available. It's not a mandatory tax, it's a voluntary program that you can opt into each tax bill. The next slide talks a little bit about where the funds go and how it's structured. So again, anyone who checks that box on a tax bill with a certain amount, those monies go into a dedicated fund for this effort. And the town's taxation aid committee, which would be established, is a group of individuals that develop the rules and the regulations and oversee requests for the dispersion of funds. So we've listed here the MGL, the state statute, who they have included that would be part of this committee. So it's the Board of Assessor Chair, the town treasurer, and 3 residents appointed by the Board of Selectmen. So what that group would do is they would adopt rules and regulations to oversee requests as well as determine the distribution of funds. So they would essentially, this group would essentially outline eligibility criteria. They would take in applications each year from residents, and then they would review those applications, look at the amount of funds available in the balance, and then disperse those funds to those individuals so long as they met that criteria. So what's nice about this program is that, as I mentioned, it provides the town to be able to set its own criteria for elderly and disabled tax relief, rather than having to follow some of the state thresholds and other programs that many people don't qualify for. And on the final slide here, just reiterates a couple of things, that this is an optional senior tax relief program. There's no cost to the taxpayers. It's a voluntary donation, and that many of our neighbors have this program: Westwood, Walpole, Needham, Sherburne, Natick, Acton, and quite a few communities on the Cape as well. So that is Article 18, which is the Elderly and Disabled Taxation Fund. The next article, if we keep going through the slides, the next one is Article 19, and this is to re-accept Mass General Law, Chapter 30B, 32B, Section 20 for OPEB trust funds. This slide lays out everything this article is about, but I'll quickly run through it. As I think many on the call here this evening know, the town accepted and created a trust fund for its OPEB benefits, and has methodically added to that each year. Since the establishment of that fund, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board had come up with requirements for all municipal governments that requires these OPEB trust funds to comply with certain criteria. This criteria is listed out here on the bottom. In summary, all the criteria really does is just protect these monies and these assets so that any monies that are contributed to them specifically go for that purpose, can't be used for any other purpose. And it also states that the fund's assets are legally protected against creditors. So the Department of Revenue, which oversees municipal finance for municipalities in the Commonwealth, has been making the rounds and encouraging communities who have not yet readopted or reaccepted the OPEB trust fund that they do so that their existing fund is compliant with these standards. So that is Article 19. I want to thank the town treasurer, Jerry Lane, for his work on putting this together. The next slide we can skip over. The next slide is for Article 21. This is for a pilot agreement for solar installation. So last summer, the Board of Selectmen had signed a letter of intent with Select Energy Company to install a roof-mounted solar array on the highway garage. We heard Barry Goldman earlier from the Capital Budget Committee talk about the town's energy efficient initiatives, and this is certainly one of them. The project will generate renewable energy, and it'll also save the town approximately $250,000 in electricity charges, as well as provide a payment to the town each year for that 20-year period through a pilot or payment in lieu of taxes. So the project is currently being finalized with the state. And if the Board of Selectmen decide to move forward with the project, we would need town meeting approval to allow the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Assessors, to negotiate and enter into a pilot agreement with Select Energy. So this is an article that would be needed if the board decides to move forward. And again, all it does is it authorizes the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Assessors to enter into an agreement for this company to pay the town payment in lieu of taxes each year for a 20-year period. The next slide is the next article. And this is to amend the town's animals bylaw, but it's really just focused on dogs. This article has come from the town's animal control officer, as well as police chief Peter McGowan. There's two main things that this change or that this article intends to do. The first is to match the fine schedule that's in the bylaw with what's listed in state statute. So many of the towns' bylaws mirror state statute, and as the state updates itself, the town's bylaws do not. So since this bylaw was established, I think some 40 or 50 years ago, the state statute has changed and our bylaw no longer reflects these changes. So that's the first thing that this article would do. And the second is to include some additional provisions also found in that state statute to really strengthen the bylaw. They're listed below here, requiring registered dog owners to notify the town clerk if there's a change of ownership with a dog, explicitly requiring rabies vaccinations for registered dogs, and then adding an exception for service dogs. So that is Article 22. Next article is 23. And so this is to allow the Board of Selectmen in the town to enter into long-term leases with wireless service providers on the existing cell tower that's located behind the highway garage. We lease space, the town leases space on that cell tower to 4 wireless service providers. All 4 of those providers' leases are set to expire in the next 3 years. They've been in effect for close to 17 years now, and we'll need town meeting authorization to allow the town to enter into subsequent 20-year long-term leases with these entities so that we can continue to lease out the cell tower to these carriers. Along with providing wireless coverage, we receive approximately $300,000 each year in lease fees from these entities. So I hope that was quick enough. I think that's it for the rest of the articles and the ones with the selectmen's designation.
Great, thank you very much, Chris. Does anyone have any questions on Articles 18, 19, 21, 22, or 23? Or comments? All right, hearing none, I will, first I'll note that there actually are no minutes to approve in this meeting, which was on an agenda item on the posted agenda. That will be deferred to the next meeting. So thank you all so much for your time and your work here tonight. I appreciate it. There, as were alluded to earlier, there are some issues that will be coming up later in the cycle before town meeting. Not full open hearings, but essentially forums on certain specific items. So I encourage all of you to keep an eye on the town website and stay tuned. With that, I'll hear a motion to adjourn, or I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Peter Smith made a motion to adjourn. Do I hear a second?
Second.
So now we have to do this roll call thing again. Bear with me just a second here while I get my list up. Rob Andrews.
Aye.
Peter Smith. Aye. David City.
Aye.
Kim Hudson.
Aye.
Dana McCormick.
Aye.
Melissa Herman. Melissa, all right, I don't see Melissa. She might have had to drop off. Steve Gasky.
Aye.
Sarah Kinney.
Aye.
And I, Gordon Kinder. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.